Okay, so ready to dive into something a little, well, dark?
Yeah, let's do it.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into, you guessed it, dark psychology.
Should be interesting.
But before you go picturing, like, shadowy figures in dark alleys, what we're really talking about are these subtle ways people try to influence each other. Stuff we see every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all experienced that, right?
Oh, yeah. So to guide us through this slightly unsettling but totally fascinating world, we're diving into dark psychology, secrets, and manipulation.
Right. That's right.
So where do we even begin? I mean, what exactly is dark psychology?
So at its core, it's really about understanding how people use psychological principles,
Hmm.
to influence others, often without us even realizing it's happening.
Okay, so it's like we're all in this game, but most of us don't even know the rules.
Exactly. And that's why we're talking about it. Knowledge is power when it comes to recognizing these tactics and not getting played.
I'm all for leveling the playing field.
Me too.
So this book, it talks about this dark continuum. Sounds kind of ominous, right? What's that all about?
Right. So it's not about putting people in these neat little boxes of, good or bad. It's more like a spectrum. We all fall somewhere on that continuum, and we all have the potential for both, like light and shadow within us.
Okay, so it's not like a light switch, you're either good or bad. It's more like we're all a mix of both.
Exactly. And recognizing that, those tendencies in ourselves, it's actually kind of reassuring in a weird way, right?
Yeah, I guess it makes us all a bit more human, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We all have
Well,
that capacity. And that's where understanding this thing called the dark triad comes into play. So we're talking about narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. I know those are some big words, and they often get a bad rap, and for good reason. But here's the thing.
okay, I'm listening.
Just because you might have some of these traits, it doesn't automatically make you a bad person.
Okay.
It's about the degree to which they're present and how they're expressed.
Okay, so like, it's not black and white, it's about the nuances.
Yeah, exactly. It's like spices in a recipe. A dash of chili flakes can add a nice kick, but too much, and you've ruined the whole dish.
Makes sense. So how do these dark triad traits actually play out in like real life manipulation?
Good question. Let's take narcissism, for example. Now, someone with strong narcissistic tendencies, they often have this, really strong need for external validation.
Oh, okay. They like need constant praise and attention.
Yeah, exactly. And they might be constantly fishing for compliments or, trying to one-up you in every conversation. Like, have you ever met someone who...
Oh, have I ever?
Right. So it's not just about, loving themselves, but it's like they need everyone else to constantly reflect that back to them.
Oh, so it's like less about genuine self-love and more about seeking external validation.
Exactly. And that need for validation can be a breeding ground for manipulation. Because one minute they might shower you with praise, what we call love bombing, and then the next they might withhold that affection completely, which is love denial, just to keep you off balance and feeling unsure.
Ugh, the classic hot and cold treatment. I've
Yeah.
definitely experienced that before.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how these like seemingly harmless situations can quickly turn manipulative. It can happen anywhere, right? Like even just chatting with someone at a party.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine you're at a party, right, having a seemingly harmless conversation, and someone subtly starts to steer the conversation, maybe making you question your own memory of an event, or planting seeds of doubt about a mutual friend.
Oh, wow.
That's manipulation in action.
It's like they're weaving this web, this narrative, and you're caught in it without even realizing it.
Yeah, and it's often done so subtly that you start questioning yourself.
Yeah.
You start doubting your own perceptions rather than
Mhm.
questioning them.
Okay, that is insidious, and it's making me rethink every interaction I've ever had.
Right.
So, how do we even begin to untangle these webs of manipulation? Where do we even start?
It all starts with understanding the tactics, right? Like, how do we even recognize when we're being manipulated?
Right. Because if we don't even know it's happening, how can we defend ourselves? So, where do we start?
Well, the book actually highlights some really common manipulation tactics. And one that always comes to mind is the silent treatment.
Oh, the silent treatment. Ugh, don't even get me started. I swear everyone's used that one at some point, right?
Yeah.
But like, what's the psychology behind it? Why is it so effective?
It's all about control, really. By refusing to communicate,
Mm.
the manipulator basically puts the onus on you to fix the situation, often by giving into what they want.
Right, and it's so passive aggressive. Because it's not like they're explicitly saying what they're upset about, so it's hard to even address it directly.
Exactly. It keeps you guessing, keeps you off balance, and that is exactly where a manipulator wants you.
Ugh, it's like playing right into their hands. Okay, so that's definitely one to watch out for. What else? What other red flags should we be aware of?
One that's super relevant these days, especially with social media, is this idea of social comparison.
Oh boy, I can already see where this is going. We're constantly bombarded with images of perfect lives, perfect bodies, perfect everything. It's like a breeding ground for insecurity.
Exactly. And manipulators, they're experts at exploiting those insecurities.
Mm.
They might casually compare you to someone else, highlight your perceived flaws or downplay your accomplishment.
Oh, it's like they're holding up this distorted mirror, making you question your own worth and value.
Precisely. Because the more you doubt yourself, the more susceptible you become to their influence.
Okay, wow, this is intense. It's like we're learning self-defense, but for our minds. What other sneaky tactics are out there?
Let's talk about rationalizing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all do it to some extent, right? We
Right.
make excuses for our behavior or the behavior of others. But in the hands of a manipulator, rationalizing becomes this tool for avoiding accountability.
So they're basically twisting the narrative to fit their agenda, making you question your own version of reality.
Yeah. They might downplay the impact of their actions or shift the blame to others, all while sounding, totally logical and reasonable.
It's like gaslighting, but with this extra layer of like plausible deniability.
And that's why it's crucial to develop your critical thinking skills. Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge their explanations. And most importantly, trust your gut instincts when something feels off.
Okay, good advice. Don't ignore those red flags. Speaking of gut instincts, this book also talks about body language.
Ah, yes. Body language. It's such a powerful tool, especially for those who know how to use it.
Right, so it's not just what they say, but how they say it. Like their posture, their gestures, their whole vibe.
Exactly. Think about mirroring, for example.
Hmm?
You might notice a manipulator subtly mimicking your posture, gestures, even your tone of voice.
Wait, really?
It's a way of building rapport and trust. Creating that sense of, hey, we're on the same page here.
Wow, it's like they're trying to create this subconscious connection, disarming you with like fake empathy.
Yeah, it can be used that way.
Right.
But mirroring can also be used more aggressively, Like imagine someone standing a little too close, maintaining intense eye contact. Their voice is low and steady. Their body language might feel intimidating, even threatening.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's definitely sending shivers down my spine.
And that's the point. They're trying to make you uncomfortable, to throw you off balance, to make you more likely to comply with their demands.
Wow, it's amazing how much is communicated nonverbally. It's like they say, the body never lies.
Right. The body often reveals more than words ever can. And speaking of words, this brings us to a really important distinction. The difference between persuasion and manipulation.
Okay, yeah. Because on the surface, those can seem very similar, but there's a fine line between them, isn't there?
You're right, it is a fine line.
Yeah.
But the key difference really lies in the intention behind it. Persuasion, at its core, is about presenting information convincingly, allowing the other person to make an informed choice.
Okay.
Manipulation, on the other hand, is about controlling the outcome, often with a disregard for the other person's well-being.
So it's about respecting someone's autonomy versus undermining it.
Yes, exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Persuasion itself isn't always ethical. Think about marketing, right? A good marketing campaign, it highlights the benefits of a product, it appeals to your needs, your desires.
Right.
But those same techniques, they can be used to sell you something you don't need, or play on your insecurities, or even just flat out deceive you.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like that saying, buyer beware.
Exactly. You have to be savvy, you have to be discerning. Recognizing manipulative persuasion is crucial. Whether it's a pushy salesperson, a friend who's guilt-tripping you, or even just misleading information you come across online.
It's everywhere. So how can we become more aware of these tactics in everyday life? Like, what are some telltale signs to look out for?
Well, one thing to watch out for is loaded language, like words that are designed to evoke a strong emotional response rather than present a balanced perspective.
Oh, interesting.
For example, a manipulator might try to shut down your argument by saying you're being negative or you're overreacting instead of, actually addressing your concerns.
Ah, those classic conversation stoppers. It's like a way of derailing the discussion and putting you on the defensive.
Right, exactly. Or they might use flattery or guilt trips to get their way. Things like, I knew I could count on you, or if you really cared about me, you'd do this.
Ugh, yes. Those phrases are like emotional pressure cookers. You're right, this stuff is everywhere. It can feel overwhelming. What about those really extreme cases, like this book mentions Charles Manson, for example.
Right. Manson is a chilling example of someone who used these dark psychology principles to a devastating effect.
Mm.
I mean, he used charisma, he used manipulation, and a very twisted ideology to control his followers, ultimately leading them to commit horrific acts.
It's terrifying to think about how someone can have that level of influence over others.
It speaks to the power of persuasion when it's used unethically, especially when you combine it with, pre-existing vulnerabilities, or even just that basic human desire to belong. And it's not just about charismatic cult leaders. Think about how propaganda and misinformation can be used to manipulate public opinion or even incite violence on a large scale.
Wow. So we're talking about going from personal manipulation to, like, societal control. This is heavy stuff.
It is, and it highlights how important critical thinking is, how important media literacy is, and also just, recognizing our own biases. But let's bring it back to the individual level for a moment.
Yes, please. Because
Yeah.
honestly, this is making me want to, like, go into hiding.
But remember, knowledge is power. And this
Yeah.
isn't about becoming paranoid. It's about empowering yourself. The more you understand these tactics, the better equipped you'll be to spot them and protect yourself.
So instead of being like a sitting duck, we can be more like psychic ninjas, like
Yeah.
deflecting those manipulation attempts with our newfound awareness.
I like that. Exactly. Think of it as developing a psychological immune system. The stronger it is, the less susceptible you'll be to these tactics.
Okay, I love that analogy, building up those mental defenses. So how do we actually do that? What are some practical steps we can take starting today?
One of the most important things is to be really honest with yourself about your own vulnerabilities. What are your triggers? What are your weaknesses? What are the things that make you more likely to give in to someone's demands?
Okay, so self-awareness is key here. Knowing yourself and what makes you tick. Got it.
Exactly. And once you're more aware of those vulnerabilities, you can start setting boundaries. Learn to say no, assertively, and without feeling guilty. Remember, you have the right to protect your own well-being, and you don't owe anyone an explanation.
That is a good reminder. Sometimes it's hard to say no, especially if you're like a natural people pleaser, but it's so important. What about those situations where you can't just like walk away, like say in a work environment?
That's where documentation is key. If you're dealing with a manipulative coworker or a boss, keep a record of their behavior. Include dates, times, specific examples, and any witnesses if possible.
So it's like gathering evidence, building a case.
Exactly. Because this documentation can be invaluable if you ever need to report their behavior or even just protect yourself legally.
Okay, that makes me feel more empowered already.
Good. And remember, you're not alone. Talk to someone you trust, a friend, a family member, a therapist. They can offer support, guidance, and just a fresh perspective.
So it's about building a support system, both personally and professionally. We're not meant to navigate these choppy waters alone.
Exactly. We're in this together.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm starting to see the world through this whole new lens.
And that's exactly the point. Remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand this stuff, the better equipped you'll be to navigate these complexities and protect yourself.
Absolutely. It's like you've handed us a decoder ring for human behavior. Speaking of decoding, this whole conversation is making me wonder about subliminal messages. Is that another form of manipulation we should be aware of? Subliminal messages, huh? So we're talking about like influencing someone without them even knowing it. That's getting into some seriously sneaky territory.
Right. It's a fascinating idea and a pretty controversial one, too. The basic concept is that by presenting information below a person's conscious awareness, you can somehow influence their thoughts, their feelings, even their actions.
So like those stories about flashing messages in movie theaters trying to get you to buy more popcorn.
Yeah, exactly. Like you plant a seed in their subconscious mind, and it just takes fruit and grows from there.
Okay, that's both cool and creepy at the same time, but does it actually work? Like, is there any real evidence to support this stuff?
The effectiveness of subliminal messaging has been debated for decades, and the research is kind of all over the place.
Okay.
While those really dramatic examples like the movie theater thing, yeah, those have pretty much been debunked. There is some evidence that suggests that we are constantly being influenced by these subtle cues and messages, whether we realize it or not.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about product placement in movies, or those really catchy jingles that get stuck in your head.
Oh, totally.
Those can actually influence our preferences
Yeah.
without us even consciously realizing it.
Okay, so maybe it's less about like mind control and more about these subtle nudges.
Exactly. And, it brings us to a really important point about this whole deep dive. We've spent all this time talking about recognizing these manipulative tactics, understanding how they work, and protecting ourselves.
Right.
But there's another side to this.
Oh, okay, I'm intrigued. What's the other side?
Well, if we can learn to recognize these tactics, if we can understand how they work and protect ourselves from their negative influence, we can also use that knowledge for good. We can become more conscious, more ethical influencers ourselves.
Oh, I like where you're going with this. So instead of just being on the defensive, we can actually use these powers for good.
Exactly. Imagine being able to use this understanding of persuasion to inspire your team at work, to advocate for a cause you really care about, or even just to communicate more effectively in your relationships.
So it's about taking back control, not just of our own minds, but of those really subtle power dynamics that are always at play in our interactions with others.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the power of influence, choosing to use it responsibly, and creating those more positive, more authentic connections with the people around us.
This deep dive has been quite the ride. We started in the shadows, uncovering all those manipulative tactics, but now it feels like we're emerging into the light, armed with all this knowledge and a sense of how to use it ethically.
And that's really what it's all about. Knowledge is power, right?
Right.
But it's up to each of us to use that power wisely.
Absolutely. This has been an amazing conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about these kind of hidden forces that are always at work, shaping our behavior.
And remember, it's not about becoming suspicious of everyone you meet.
Right.
It's about awareness. It's about discernment. And most importantly, trusting your gut when something feels off.
Well said. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. And for anyone listening, if you want to go even deeper into the world of dark psychology, persuasion, and influence, be sure to check out the book that inspired this episode, Dark Psychology: Secrets and Manipulation. It's a fascinating read. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep empowering yourselves with knowledge.